When I was 12, I went to a week-long scout camp with my troop. Our campsite was eerily isolated, far removed from the rest of the camp. Despite there being hundreds of kids overall in our secluded patch of woods, there were only 5 of us and 2 or 3 leaders. I shared a tent with 2 other kids. Being the odd one out, I brought a full-sized cot to sleep on while the others laid on the cold, hard ground. I've always had trouble sleeping anywhere but my own bed, so I relied on sleeping pills to get through the night. The pills had a side effect. They blurred the line between dreams and reality, leaving me disoriented. On the final night, a storm swept through, lightning slicing the sky as we sat huddled, telling scary stories. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't wait to leave. After taking my pills, I drifted into a restless sleep. But in the dead of night, I woke up. I opened my eyes, barely able to see in the dark. That's when I noticed a figure, crouched at the foot of my cot. My blood ran cold. I had woken because someone had gently grabbed my leg. He didn't look like any of the leaders. Groggy and terrified, I whispered, "What?" The figure didn't respond. I blinked, trying to shake off the confusion. Maybe it was just the pills, I told myself. I shut my eyes, hoping it was just a dream. But then, the grip on my leg tightened. I said, "What?" Again, my voice trembling. The figure slowly moved, leaning down until I could no longer see him from my elevated cot. I couldn't hear a thing. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to bring myself to peek over the edge. My mind spiraled. Was it real, or was it the pills? The horror was suffocating, but exhaustion overtook me, and I fell in and out of a fitful sleep. When dawn finally broke, the pale light trickled into the tent. I forced myself to look over the edge. The kid next to me was still fast asleep, untouched. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a bad dream. But then, at breakfast, the boy who had been sleeping beside me asked if anyone else had noticed someone in the tent overnight. My heart skipped. The third tent mate chimed in, saying he assumed someone had gotten up to use the bathroom, but none of us had left our cots. We asked the leaders and other scouts, hoping one of them would admit to playing a prank. But no one had any idea what we were talking about. The thing is, nothing violent had happened. No real harm was done, just an intruder. Silent, creeping, touching. Why would someone sneak into our tent only to quietly grab my leg and vanish? The memory haunts me, a bizarre and chilling enigma I still can't explain. That wasn't the only time something strange happened on a camping trip. I remember another night, deep in the mountains of North Carolina. It had been peaceful, a beautiful escape from the world, until at 3 a.m. everything changed. It started with a noise, a terrible noise. Every creature within miles seemed to go berserk. I jolted awake in my hammock, heart pounding. Being from the Midwest, I'd survived a few tornadoes, and it felt just like that. The animals sensed something terrible, something unnatural. Their screeches drove through the night air like a warning, yet the sky was clear. My brother, hanging in the hammock above me, peeked out, eyes wide as he whispered, "What is happening?" The noise, the madness, it continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than 30 seconds. And then, in a wave, it stopped. Not all at once. No, it was like the chaos was being swallowed by the night, starting from the edges and collapsing inward until silence fell. We were too scared to stay still. After a few moments of frozen panic, we scrambled out of our hammocks and rekindled the fire, its light stretching out like a protective barrier. My brother went to check on my sister and her friend Caleb, who were camped further up the ridge. That night, under the still starry sky, we couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed through, something that had disturbed not just the animals, but the very air around us. Something that watched, and then, in the silence, retreated into the shadows, leaving us with nothing but the memory of its presence. As soon as my brother reached their hammocks, he let out a scream, a sharp, shrieking kind of yell. the kind I had only heard from him twice before. Once when his friend got a bike handlebar lodged an inch deep into his stomach, and another when he split his own head open. My blood ran cold. I grabbed an axe in my right hand, the first aid kit in my left, and clamped a flashlight between my teeth as I sprinted up to the ridge, bracing myself for the worst. When I got to Caleb's hammock, I found him in a state of shock. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, his entire body trembling as he stared down the valley. His gaze was hollow, like he was seeing something we couldn't. My sister, of course, hadn't even stirred. Typical. She had her headphones in, music blaring all night. She'd rather block out the world than deal with the sounds of nature. When we finally woke her, she looked at us like we were insane. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, utterly oblivious. We managed to get Caleb down by the fire, wrapped him in blankets, and handed him a shot of whiskey. He barely touched it, just stared into the flames, as if the fire held some answer we couldn't grasp. The night was too bizarre, too unsettling to sleep. We sat there, wide awake, as Caleb finally collapsed into a fitful sleep beside the fire at dawn. When the sun started rising, my brother and I left the fire to see it from the ridge. The view was breathtaking, almost peaceful in its perfection. Caleb had picked the spot, as he always did. But even in the golden light of morning, something didn't feel right. We sat in Caleb's hammock, still trying to shake off the lingering strangeness from the night. Then, my brother spotted something. "What's that?" he muttered, pointing down at the valley. It took a moment for me to catch his perspective, but then I saw it too, a strange clearing on the bank of the river. We debated going down to check it out, and my sister, of course, wanted no part of it. "Stay here with Caleb," I said, leaving her with my axe and the emergency GPS. "Just scream if you need us." She rolled her eyes. "You're freaking me out. Just go. I'll be fine." The hike down took about 20 minutes, and the closer we got, the more unsettled we became. The forest was unnaturally silent. No birds, no animals, nothing. When we reached the clearing, it was bizarre, an area about 100 yards across, perfectly triangular. Everything inside the triangle had been flattened. The bushes, the grass, even towering alea bushes, usually standing tall at 6 to 8 feet, were bent, pressed to the ground as if something had forced them down. We pulled out our phones to take pictures, but dead, both of them. My phone, notorious for dying, had a fully charged battery pack attached to it. My brother's phone, always reliable, connected to his solar charger, was also dead. We exchanged a look, paranoia creeping in. Without saying a word, we turned and started back to camp, leaving the eerie triangle behind. When we got back, Caleb was awake, sitting by the fire, looking as normal as ever. My sister sat across from him, but something in her eyes told me she'd seen something, felt something. "You all right, bro?" my brother asked Caleb, trying to gauge his state. Caleb just grinned. "Yeah, man, I'm good. Guess I missed the sunrise, but I needed to sleep." We stared at him, bewildered. He was acting like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been frozen in terror just hours before. "Do you remember last night?" my brother asked. Caleb frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" My sister leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Stop messing with us, Caleb. You were freaked out. You don't remember?" Caleb just laughed. "I figured something must have been up since I woke up next to the fire, but I don't remember anything. I guess I just had some crazy dreams." We pressed him, but nothing jogged his memory. To him, the night was a blank. That's when we told him about the clearing by the river, about our dead phones. We pulled out our phones to show him, and chills ran down our spines. They were on, fully charged. My brother's phone at 67%, mine at 41%. It didn't make sense. Nothing about that night did. We decided it was time to pack up and leave. The vibe was too off, too unsettling. But before we finished, Caleb asked, "Hey, have you guys seen my camera?" His prized DSLR was missing. He had slept with it every night, tucked into his hammock like it was a part of him. But now it was gone. No one saw it. No one heard anything. Just vanished, like it had been swallowed by the same force that had flattened the forest, leaving us with more questions than answers. We scoured the ridge, the fire pit, and every inch in between, but Caleb's camera was gone. He even ventured down the ridge toward the river, thinking it might have rolled down the hill. But there was no trace of it. Gone. We couldn't shake the weirdness, so we decided to leave. My siblings and I agreed to pitch in for a new camera for Caleb, but our main goal was to get out of there fast. About 3 miles down the trail, an hour into our hike, my brother turned to me, his voice low. "Do you think he tried to take a picture of something he wasn't supposed to see?" A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't even want to entertain the thought. "Let's just forget about it and get the hell out of here," I muttered, glancing over my shoulder as if something or someone might be watching us. He nodded, and we continued in uneasy silence. That was a year ago. Since then, Caleb has disappeared. He hasn't been seen or heard from in 8 months. No calls, no texts, nothing. Fast forward to today, I'm 26 now, and I've been planning a camping trip with my wife and dad for months. We don't get out into the woods often, so I wanted it to be perfect. This trip was to Davy Crockett National Forest in East Texas, a dense, isolated place. My dad headed out early to find us a good campsite. The layout was simple: 2 dirt roads on either side of us and an overlook to the north. We set up in between, hoping for a peaceful getaway. My wife and I arrived around 11 a.m. and the day went by smoothly. It wasn't until dinner that things started to get strange. A beat-up truck began circling our campsite. Around and around, its headlights slicing through the trees. Finally, the driver stopped and got out, claiming this was his family's spot. He even insisted the firewood scattered around was his. My dad, who'd been there since 9 Amaze, tried to explain the whole first come, first served rule, but the man didn't care. Then, without hesitation, he asked if he could camp right next to us. Being polite, we said sure. We didn't realize he meant right next to us. He backed his camper so close, it nearly blocked in our truck. It made no sense. There were plenty of other open campsites, but he chose to set up practically on top of us. We brushed it off and tried to enjoy the night. A bit later, we noticed another truck, a white Dodge Dually circling our site, just like the first one had. It looped around several times, moving slow, deliberate. An odd feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, but we ignored it, figuring the overlook nearby attracted a lot of people. After a long night of drinking and joking around, we decided to call it a night. I was deep in sleep when I woke to a blood-curdling scream from the woods. I shot up, heart racing. My wife, wide-eyed, asked, "What was that?" Before I could answer, another scream, this one even more distant, but just as chilling. My instinct kicked in. I grabbed my gun and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the darkness. My dad had left a lantern burning, casting an eerie glow across the campsite. Just as I looked around, the white Dodge came barreling down the dirt road behind us, headlights blazing. It roared past, tires kicking up dust, but then it stopped. We froze. The truck's engine idled in the distance before we heard doors slam, followed by shouting. My pulse quickened as the voices grew louder, then more frantic. They got back in the truck, driving slowly down the road in front of our camp. At this point, we were on edge, terrified they were coming to rob us, but they didn't stop. Instead, they sped off into the night, disappearing into the trees. Moments later, gunshots echoed from the direction they'd gone. Then silence. We huddled together, too scared to sleep. We figured maybe they were drunk, messing around, but something didn't sit right. We had no signal to call for help, so we just tried to wait out the night. The next morning, we had to make a run into town for supplies. As we hit the main highway, we saw police everywhere patrolling, stopping cars. They had 2 young men in custody. We assumed they were the troublemakers from the night before and didn't think much of it. But when we got back to camp, the cops were just leaving after speaking with my dad. He told us what the officers had said. The guys in the white dually had broken into another camp while the young men were out hunting. When they returned, they caught the robbers in the act. The thieves pulled guns on them and robbed them at gunpoint. My stomach churned. If it hadn't been for the strange family camping so close to us, we might have been their target instead. As unsettling as it was, that odd family crowded so unnervingly close had made our camp look bigger, safer than it was. And for once, I was grateful for something that didn't make sense. The men in the white dually were never caught. But I still hear those screams in my nightmares.